Ты Суба?
Morto.
Ja, bei Suba.
Are you guys Turks?
Eşi hasta Azerbaycan şişmena.
Christ, please don't shoot! Don't shoot!
Lost and found in Armenia.
Good evening and welcome to Lights on LA. I'm your host, Louise Gill. Before I start, I would like to just mention, for those of you that have not seen Lost and Found in Armenia, please go and see it. It is a very, very nice comedy with Jamie Kennedy and Angela Sarafian. Please go see it. Tonight I have the fortunate of having a wonderful guest with me, Pete Samish, who is a former Los Angeles County Sheriff Deputy and also an expert in gun safety and gun regulations. Hello, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine, Louise. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Before we start, I would like to ask you to give us a little background of your expertise before you were a deputy sheriff.
Well, before I became a deputy sheriff, I used to teach firearms instruction, intermediate, advanced, and beginning firearms instruction. Basically the defensive use of handguns, rifles, and shotguns. And I used to teach law enforcement and qualified civilians.
And before that?
Well, before that, I was involved in the motion picture industry for 26 years.
Oh, wow. And then all of a sudden, from that to guns, and then to Los Angeles County Sheriff.
Well, I guess I just haven't figured out what I want to do when I grow up.
And what about now, currently?
Well, right now I work as a non-disclosed expert witness, and I work in criminal and civil litigation.
And how's that?
Very interesting.
I'm sure it is. Going into gun regulations and safety, I think the most important issue that we have currently nowadays is young kids not knowing or getting involved and also going into schools with guns. Could you tell us a little bit about how parents and also kids could be more safe with guns? Because I'm sure every household has guns.
Well, there's certainly enough households that have guns. And the problem with firearms is when you ignore them. Children have to be made aware of firearms. They have to be taught how to safely handle them and what the consequences are of mishandling them. The NRA has the Eddie Eagle program, and there are other programs out there that, they educate children. And they educate adults also. It's not really politically correct to be working in the firearms industry, so to speak, and it's kind of a taboo thing, and people want to ignore firearms. And when you ignore the firearms, it becomes a problem. Firearms are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. And as soon as everybody realizes that and does something about it, then kids are going to be raised in a more safe environment.
Now, how do we protect our kids? I mean, what do we teach them?
Well, what I did with my daughter is, because I was a deputy sheriff and because I was a firearms instructor, I had firearms in the house all the time. The ones that I weren't carrying for personal protection in my job were locked up in a safe. But I knew that there were going to be firearms that were going to be out, and I realized at a very, early point that there's no such thing as child-proofing a gun. It's not possible.
No, it isn't.
But you can gun-proof a child. You really can. You take the mystery out of it. I mean, when a parent sits there and says, don't go into daddy's closet because there's a gun in there, all you've done is you've set the stage immediately for a horrible disaster.
Right.
I mean,
curiosity.
Yeah. With my daughter, she grew up around guns. When she was a little child, she was very interested in guns. And I taught her the 4 rules of firearm safety. And I wound up showing her how to check to make sure that a firearm was unloaded, and I supervised her. And I told her, I said, listen, anytime you want to handle one of daddy's guns, you come and you see me, you tell me that you want to check out daddy's gun, and I will promise you I'll stop everything I'm doing, and I'll let you check out the gun. Well, for the first couple of days, I really didn't do too much of anything else except, supervise my daughter
Of course.
handling my firearm, the gun that I was carrying at the time, which was a revolver. And as time went by, the newness wore off, the curiosity wore off, and it became less and less of a priority for her. So you take the mystery out of it. And the other thing that's really important, and I can't stress this enough, even if your children don't become interested in firearms, if taught correctly, they will know when somebody is mishandling a firearm.
Right.
And they can tell the person who's doing it to stop, or they themselves can just leave the area and get out of there. Unfortunately, what happens is you'll have a bunch of kids or young adults around, and one of them is mishandling a firearm, and that child might not even know that he's mishandling the firearm. And then all of a sudden, a bad thing happens, and nobody's there to sit there and stop that kid because nobody knows. It's an ignorance thing, and it's such a politically charged topic these days. It seems that people are either pro-gun or they're anti-gun, and there really is no middle ground. It's so polarized, and the problem is that because there's no middle ground, you have people that are vehemently opposed to firearms, who don't want to discuss them, don't want to have anything to do with them whatsoever.
Right.
And then you have the people that are surrounded by firearms either because of their hobby or their profession.
Right. Now, as far as there is a lot of illegal guns now that are being, taken out, or they're illegal. What are some of those that are illegal right now?
Well, are we talking about, illegal guns as far as the Department of Justice in California is concerned?
Right.
Well, you have a lot of, it's actually a very complicated kind of an issue. There are what are referred to as assault weapons, and assault weapons will have a flash hider, a pistol grip, any two of the above. It's a rather complicated situation. A lot of people have assault weapons, they don't even know it. Okay, it's not a user-friendly set of laws, and it's really kind of too complicated of an issue to really address fully, in the show.
Basic rules for somebody that has a gun in their car. What is the procedure of the gun in the magazine? There's a lot of confusion.
Right. If you're transporting a firearm, the firearm and the ammunition have to remain separate. So the best place to carry a firearm and the ammunition would be in the trunk. The gun is in one bag with the magazines and your hearing protection or whatever else, and the ammunition is in a separate bag. Okay, they don't have to be at separate ends of the trunk. They can just be in two separate, containers within the trunk. The rule of thumb is that it can't be readily accessible to the occupants of the vehicle. If you had a pickup truck, for instance, you would want to store the firearm and the ammunition behind the seat in the pickup truck. That way it is not considered readily accessible to the occupants.
Now, as far as, let's just say hypothetically, if a police officer does pull you over and you are carrying a firearm, you did forget to take out the magazine. Would that be considered a misdemeanor, a felony?
Barring any aggravating circumstances, such as the commission of a crime on top of carrying a loaded and concealed firearm, it would be considered a misdemeanor in and of itself. Okay, that's how that would be viewed.
And then obviously if it's an assault or anything else,
well, yeah,
it could be confiscated.
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. Even if you're carrying it in your vehicle and there's no aggravating circumstances, the gun can be confiscated, and then you, through your attorney, would have to petition the court to have it returned to you.
Is it easy to, first of all, get a concealed weapons permit?
Depends on where you live in California. There are some counties where the sheriff issues them, and then there are some counties like Los Angeles where it's really pretty much next to impossible to get a concealed weapons permit.
As far as businesses, I believe you are allowed to have a concealed weapon.
You are allowed to keep a firearm in your business, in your place of business. There's an issue of carrying a loaded and firearm on your hip within your business. It's pretty much accepted that the shop owner would keep a loaded and concealed firearm within reach, but he wouldn't be walking around inside his store wearing a firearm.
Now, we were discussing this earlier. If somebody wants to have a gun at the house and something were to happen, could you tell us a little bit about when will it be legal to use the firearm?
Well, it's a complicated issue, but if somebody were to break into your house, you would be, and there are a lot of other extenuating circumstances, but generally, if someone were to break into your house and threaten you, you would be justified in using a firearm to defend yourself.
Okay. And basic rule about someone wanting to buy a gun, what is the process?
Well, if you want to buy a firearm, you go to a firearms dealer. That's one way of doing it. If you want to buy a used gun, some firearms dealers stock used guns, and you fill out paperwork. You fill out firearms, a federal firearms 4473 form, and then you have the state paperwork that you also have to fill out. And this state requires a 10-day wait, and the 10-day wait is so that all of your information can be run through the Department of Justice to make sure that you have no history of mental instability or any kind of a criminal record.
And one question that I have, assault rifles, they're illegal to have.
Yes, they are. There's a whole issue right now where, long story short, the list of banned rifles was a hard list that was put out when the assault weapon ban first came into being. There are companies that have since manufactured these weapons and receivers that are not named on the banned list.
Okay.
So people are putting them together and they're using what's referred to as a bullet button to skirt the assault weapon restriction. The bullet button, the ordinance pretty much reads that the magazine cannot be readily detachable from the gun. That means you can't use your finger or your thumb to just punch the button and the mag drops out. So they have what's called a bullet button, which replaces the normal button on it, and you have to use a tool, i.e., the bullet. You take a bullet and you take the pointed end of the bullet and you push it into a recess which drops the magazine. And that takes it out of the arena of readily detachable from the weapon. They're in the process right now. I believe there's the Senate just passed out of legislation a bill that will ban bullet buttons. And a lot of draconian laws have come out, or proposed laws that have come out of the Senate that now still have to be ratified by the House. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. That's yet to be seen.
Now, taking out, let's say, assault rifles, does that resolve the fact of crime?
No, not at all. See, the problem that you've got is the legislature really, and the politicians, can't beat up on the criminals because, by definition, the criminals just don't care. I mean, criminals don't open the paper and go, oh no, we just passed a new law. I've got to go back to school and get my medical license, get my medical degree. Criminals by definition don't pay any attention to the laws. So the people that get beat up over all of this are the law-abiding citizens. They're the ones who get penalized, and they're the whipping boys and girls of the politicians. And it's really unfair. I mean, you have more law-abiding citizens in this state than you do criminals. All of these laws are designed to affect the law-abiding, not the criminals, because the criminals just don't care.
Right. They're not going to open up a newspaper and go, oh my God.
No, they're not. That's just not going to happen.